Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Void Wave podcast. Today we're going to talk about the film Children of Men from 2006 and talk about the ethics and politics associated with it.
Yeah, just a quick introduction of ourselves. My name is Jonathan and I'm here with Carlos. And yeah, Children of Men came out in 2006, was made by a Mexican guy called Alfonso Cuarón. And some of his other films include, I think he made the third Harry Potter movie.
Yeah.
What was it called? Like The Prisoner of Azkaban. He made Gravity, which probably a lot of people have seen, and Roma.
Yeah, that's right. It was so the film was a bit of a flop at the time. It barely made its money back, I think, but it's considered the 11th greatest film of the 2000s, at least according to some sources and some publications. So generally very well perceived by critics, and I think the reason we're discussing it is because it, in the kind of the places we frequent online, like Reddit discords and message boards and Twitter, it's often a film associated with antinatalism and with pessimistic philosophy. And I've often wanted to kind of reply to those comments, and I thought I have a lot to say about it. And so I'd rather just record the podcast about it and kind of talk about it and use that as a reply. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, the movie, I didn't see it like exactly when it came out, but maybe a year or two later, I think. And it wasn't like super big when it came out, right? It wasn't exactly popular, and in the meantime it became like a modern classic almost, because a lot of the themes the movie touches on are obviously very, very relevant, and we are going to get into that later. But yeah, I'm basically on the same page with you there. I think it's a good movie in terms of how, the narration is structured and all of that, and it's entertaining, it's not boring. But some of the themes or how the movie chooses to engage with those themes might be a little bit subject to criticism, I guess.
Yeah, so Children of Men is set in 2027, so 7 years from now. It's mainly set in London, but they do travel a bit around the UK, around England. We can see that the borders are closed, but kind of people are still kind of going about their normal day-to-day lives, which is kind of weird. I mean, when I say people, I mean the citizens, British citizens, or people who have papers to exist in this society. So it is pretty much like a near future type sci-fi movie where you see, with a small change to how things are, how everything would be in the future. So this small change, which is actually a big change, would be that we haven't had any baby being born for the past 18 years.
Right. So yeah, people call it a science fiction, but it's not super futuristic. I mean, there's like one scene where you see like a cool bit of futuristic looking technology, but overall it's set in the near future, definitely. And yeah, the main premise of the movie is this global infertility crisis, which spawns all sorts of political and social and religious conflicts. And yeah.
So there's a very interesting Mark Fisher quote from his book Capitalism Realism, which came out just a few years after Children of Men, where it says, "For all that we know, the authoritarian measures that are everywhere in place," so he was referring to Children of Men, "could have been implemented within a political stricture that remains notionally democratic. The war on terror," so this is our war on terror that we have in our actual real life, "has prepared us for such a development." So I found this a really interesting quote because right now in UK, in August, we have the BBC and Sky News both kind of broadcasting directly from the English Channel, where they're just going around in a boat and kind of showing migrants in these very poor boats like rafts or dinghies and trying to cross the channel, and they're doing kind of live reporting. And honestly, I think they want something bad to happen. They want to see like one of those boats go down, so there's some drama, so the news footage has some drama, and there's a lot of publicity, a lot of activity in the media, with political parties trying to score points with the refugees. Last night as in the 27th of October 2020, there was a far-right group in UK that went to a hotel that's hosting refugees, and they went around knocking on doors, asking people why they're there, but not asking why they're there in a nice way, asking in the worst possible way. So there's a lot of anti-refugee sentiment, but we're still in a democracy, right? And
yeah, I mean, for Germany, which is where I'm from, it's basically the same situation, but we are obviously not an island nation. So all of our borders, except for the northern half, are land borders. So for us, the situation is maybe a little bit different. You don't get pictures in the media of drowning refugees or whatever, but it's also like a very hot button issue here as well, of course. And I guess that's why the movie stayed relevant, right? Because the migration crisis isn't going anywhere.
Yes.
And and about democratic institutions staying in place, that's true. But in a way, in the movie, it is depicted as basically that the rights of the immigrants have been stripped away completely, almost. It's more like a Starship Trooper-esque scenario where the citizens have rights, but everybody who's not a citizen has no rights, essentially.
Yeah, although Starship Troopers is a bit more optimistic than that, right? Because you could apply to become a citizen by serving the military service, whereas the route to citizenship for these refugees in Children of Men, there's pretty much like no route or at least they don't talk about any route. It's just kind of huddled up and put together like animals in going to a farm, to an abattoir or something along those lines. So anyway, there's mostly everything looks the same, and as a person who lives in London, mostly everything looks the same. There's still shops operating, the transaction of money. It's just that the population is kind of aged, although for us living in Europe, the visuals of the movie with the population age didn't even seem that old. Although I guess if somebody watches that movie and they live maybe in Africa or some parts of South America, maybe everybody looks very old, but I can tell you the average age of people in Children of Men is kind of what you see in London normally, I would say, except no babies and children. But overall, it didn't even feel that old. Most of the people. Yeah,
true. It didn't really feel like it's an super aged population. Maybe a little bit, but not super aged.
Yeah.
And like the main difference, I guess, which gives you clues that it's not not the world we are inhabiting right now. Are the little things like the propaganda screens and the news reports. The opening narration the movie starts off and stuff.
Yeah. It was actually they put quite a lot of these clues, right? For example, there's one that says kidneys, instant cash, which I found very funny.
It's about organ selling. Basically.
Yeah, it's interesting because this would assume somewhat that the National Health Service in the UK would have collapsed, I guess.
Or at least
kind of bad
deep crisis.
Deep crisis, I guess it would be. And then there's another one that says jobs for the Brits, which, to be honest, could be a slogan used by a political party in 2020 here in the UK.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
Not even a far-right party. And then another that says, only Britain, soldiers on, which is another that, to be honest, both right and left parties in the UK could use in 2020 and have used recently. So I think people were more optimistic in 2006 than they're now in 2020, by using these things as a dystopia.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, a lot of the stuff, we are really heading in that direction, I think, in terms of, more authoritarian forms of, democracy, quote unquote. And, this is obviously going to be exacerbated by the influx of, climate refugees, which is only going to get worse in the near future.
Yeah, climate refugees and refugees of climate wars, I guess. Which
the movie is not too far off in that regard, I think.
Yeah, which actually raises the question, because for me, the most interesting things about the movie, to discuss about or to think about, were the political side of it, whereas the lack of fertility, which is what causes this massive crisis, right? For me, that was like the least interesting part to think about the movie, right? Because that's the one that's most far-fetched.
Yeah, I think the way I think about it now, after having watched the movie twice, recently twice, is that the whole thing about the infertility crisis and, the way the figure of the child is used as a symbol for future and such, that's really, it's a symbolic function almost, right? You can almost replace like the whole infertility crisis problem with a different problem, and you could still make the same movie essentially. You'd have to change a few things here and there plot-wise, but essentially it's just, a representative of, existential threats that could wipe out human civilization entirely, right?
There's a bit of the movie is quite clever in how it talks about that. So, for example, there's a demonstration in, I think, Trafalgar Square. I might be wrong, but somewhere in a public square in London, and there's some religious people there. I don't want to use the word zealots, but they're quite committed to their protesting. And one of the placards says, "Infertility is God's punishment." And
maybe we should talk about this as well, because
it's very meta,
the cause,
isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that the cause of the infertility crisis is never really explained in the movie. There are some hints here and there. Maybe it's a punishment from God, or it has something to do with environmental pollution or radiation. But it's left ambiguous on purpose, probably.
Yeah. But for me, if I think in the book it's about pollution and kind of environmental degradation, as you were saying, and sperm counts and whatever. But in the movie, since there's no reason, no explanation for it, except it just happens, and it kind of happens all over the world at the same time. So you can imagine, we know that sperm counts for people in civilized countries are lower than industrial developed countries are lower than people who from elsewhere who have, let's say, a more healthy environment to live in. But in this movie, infertility is widespread. So you could be, one of the tribes in the Amazon who's had barely any contact with the outside world, and these people would also have a fertility crisis, right? When they say no babies have been born, it's an absolute statement. It doesn't mean no babies in Britain or no babies in Europe. It just means no babies anywhere. So
yeah, right.
So the only way to create something like this would be God, pretty much.
Yeah, it's a borderline supernatural premise almost, because what else could cause something like this?
Yeah,
under,
it's
a
not
higher
gonna,
force.
It's not going to be
somehow.
It's not going to be 3 extra degrees of heat that cause mass infertility, right? So it's pretty much it just, for me, it just sets the movie immediately in this kind of religious context.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I think because the movie is, in its themes centrally. I mean, you have all of these political and social issues, but they're really sidelined almost when it comes to the actual plot of the movie, and that is more about, spirituality, I guess, and religious themes, hope for the future.
Yeah.
And those sort of things.
Okay.
So it makes sense that maybe the cause for this crisis is a lack of faith or lack of hope.
Lack of hope. So, to answer the question that a lot of people ask online, is this an antinatalist movie?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, I think, because even after the first time I watched it, I didn't really go away with the opinion, this world with the global infertility, that is endorsed by the movie, right? I mean, it's clearly set up as the problem to be solved, right? And that goes pretty much against what antinatalism would propose, right?
Yeah, it uses the metaphor of fertility and kind of birth as a tie-in for all, let's say, the good qualities of human beings, right? It's a symbol of the qualities of human beings, which is compassion, hope. There's a point when this lady called Miriam, if I remember correctly her name, and she's talking about what's happened and everything that's happened. And she says, very odd what happens in a world without children's voices, which I don't know about that.
That's I mean, it has to do with what children stand for culturally usually, which is it extends humanity into the future, right? If you have children, then you know that after your own death, something will still go on, and it'll just continue into the future. And in an absence of children or a lack of children, it kind of kills that, right?
Yeah.
And that is I think what they were going for with the movie. I don't know about the book because I think neither of us have read it. I've just briefly skimmed like a synopsis of the book, and it's a little bit different than the movie, but it seems like the core tenets are more or less the same in the movie, and it's about that as well, I think.
Yeah.
In the book.
And the author approved the book, so I'm okay with going just watching the film.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a strong theme of kind of continuity, and we can find that when they go to the Ark of the Arts at Battersea Power Station. Actually, what they show in the movie is a mix between the Museum of Modern Art in South London, in the South Bank, and they saw the Battersea Power Station as well. So it's kind of a mix of shots, but mostly it's a place where they're kind of storing art, I guess. And it reminds me of, just to keep it very topical and recent, there's a recent tweet by Elon Musk, that humanist, who said, "This is why we must preserve the light of consciousness by becoming a spacefaring civilization and extending life to other planets." So this idea of kind of preserving the light of consciousness is what they're doing, right? It's the children, it's the kind of storing Guernica from Picasso, the painting, storing the Apollo statue and a bunch of other pieces of art in this kind of vault. Just in case everything goes badly, it's preserved for the future, in case humanity doesn't make it.
Yeah, I mean, that is actually one of the aspects of the movie that I enjoyed the most, I think. It's not a big part of the movie. It's basically just Theo, played by Clive Owen, our protagonist, visiting his bourgeois government official cousin in his power station mansion, which is kind of strange, but okay. He's called Nigel, and he is the guy who saves artworks from destruction, basically. And I think what they were going for with that is that they are trying to contrast like Nigel's very cold and hollow preservationism of art versus Theo, who goes through a series of events which resemble the inspiration or the inspirational events that inspire such artworks, right? All the misery and the destruction. You see, as you mentioned, Picasso's Guernica and Banksy's, what's it called? The two policemen kissing, I think.
I don't think it has a title except Kissing Policemen.
Yeah. Kissing Policemen, yeah. So it's a lot of, very politically and socially critical artworks, right?
Yeah.
And you have this guy who's living, a very good life in his little power station mansion. Totally disconnected from just the everyday struggle of the people who are just trying to survive this crisis, right?
Yeah.
And all he is concerned with is, saving and preserving these artworks. And there's this nice scene where they're having dinner together, and he rambles on about how he tried to save La Piété, La Pietà, I think it's called, which is a very famous marble statue of Maria holding the dead Jesus in her arms, I think, which was destroyed in Madrid in some kind of, bombing attack or whatever. They don't go into that as much. And he just talks about the artwork, and then Theo has to, kind of add on. So, oh yeah, that was really bad, but also for people,
Yes, yeah.
So he's really more concerned with saving the art. And by doing so misses the point of the artwork, which is, to create a sense of remembrance of these events, right?
Yeah.
So he loses the human component to what art means and what it tries to express.
Yeah, and
I like that. Yeah.
Everybody in the movie is there's obviously the bigger picture of kind of keeping humanity going and preserving the light of consciousness and whatever, but there's also this kind of thing about I will never get to experience being a parent, right? Which is effectively what Julian, who is Theo's ex-wife and who's now one of the leaders of the kind of, I would say, left-wing revolutionaries called the Fishes, and they had a child together, and this child died due to the flu pandemic. Stop me if this sounds familiar, by the way.
Since we're currently very topical at the moment.
Yeah, very topical. But what they missed, I guess, what they missed as parents were, I got ahead of myself. What they missed was the being parents bit, right? So they were parents, and then they couldn't be parents anymore, and then everybody's infertile anyway. So that was it. That was their shot at becoming parents. At no point, I think they mentioned Theo and Julian together talking about the light of consciousness or keeping humanity going. It was purely that kind of personal one-to-one emotional level. And if you look at that scene with Nigel, he's got his son at the table, or what I assume is his son. Pretty sure it's his son.
Yeah, I think so.
And who's older than 18, obviously, because the oldest baby is 18 years old. The oldest person is 18 years old. But this son is completely disconnected from any kind of human relation. He's just playing with his phone. I guess some kind of or sort of handheld game is a better description.
Yeah, it's not really clear what it is, actually.
Yeah.
It looks like, some kind of VR thing, maybe.
Yeah.
But he's like totally zoned out, and he has to be yelled at.
Yeah.
To even
maybe he's playing the future Minecraft, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, with his VR headset. And so for Nigel, it's not about being a parent, right? For him, it's about kind of keeping humanity going. Because he's got a son right there, and he's kind of detached from the son. The son is just a prop in this room with other objects, I guess. And the son actually reminded me a lot about, this is going to sound so boomerish, but here I go. It reminds me a lot of young people these days.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
When we were young.
Yeah, but it reminds me a lot of young people these days. The people kind of I talk with, and I think you as well, on Reddit and Discord and social media, who kind of look at the looming climate catastrophe coming, and the fact that there are no jobs or very little jobs, paying nothing compared to 20 years ago, which is when I started my professional career. Very little expectation of owning a property or having a retirement of some kind or any kind of political stability. And this kind of younger person, was one of the few younger people we see in the movie, or get some insights into them, they've completely despaired, right? They've completely detached. Yeah, they've given up, right? They're just kind of on this kind of hedonistic trip where they just, what amuses me now, playing this game, so I'll just do that and just completely ignore all the other stuff that's going on.
Right, so they're basically giving in to denial and, flight from reality in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about that is that I think Nigel is doing more or less the same thing, even though it doesn't appear that way, because, he's doing stuff, he's saving art or whatever. But at the end of the scene specifically, like Theo kind of calls him out, right? He says, 100 years from now, there won't be one sad fuck to look at any of this. What keeps you going? And Nigel simply answers with, I just don't think about it.
Yes.
So he's in denial too, in a way, and he has created his own little delusion that keeps him going.
Yeah. So if we talk about one of our favorite philosophers, Zapfe, I think that's how you pronounce his name, the Norwegian, in that scene is quite cool, because if you read The Last Messiah and you're looking like for the 4 remedies against the panic of existence or existential angst, which he describes as isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation. Both Nigel and his son, which I don't remember has a name.
I think he's called Alex, but
Alex.
Doesn't matter.
So they're both engaging in the same kind of behavior, right? But just different kinds of it, right? They're both kind of trying to push away this idea of oblivion, of total annihilation. But whereas, Alex is pretty much just kind of using something, distraction, right? Just focusing completely on a task that has no relation to the source of his agony and lack of hope. Whereas Nigel believes he's doing something, right? So, which would be kind of a Zappa sort of sublimation, right? I'm doing something. I'm kind of trying to stop this from happening by collecting all these items.
I think they both also appear very isolated in their little mansion up in the power station. Like, it's very big rooms and there's barely anyone around except for their servants or whatever.
Yeah, and another thing
it's
which...
very Zappian.
So,
very Zappian.
Another thing which I found really interesting, to get out of Battersea, maybe we can come back, was that Theo visits his old friend, played by Michael Caine, who lives in this cottage in the middle of nowhere, and he's a man who's pretty much kind of decided to withdraw from society, right? He feels powerless to change things, so he just said, well, I might as well enjoy. I'm old anyway, and his wife is kind of is sick and kind of non-responsive in I would say a catatonic state, but honestly probably there's another psychological term for it. And one thing that I've found really cool about that scene and that setting was that they had a suicide kit, which are given out by the government, which I found...
The Quietus kit.
It comes in a little box, very fancy.
Yeah. Very corporate design.
Yeah, corporate
very
design.
Slick.
And I just found that's so funny, the government just acknowledging that there's no hope. At the same time they're running fertility campaigns, right? Because there's a poster that says avoiding fertility tests is a crime, right?
Yeah.
So,
apparently, I think in the book this plays a bigger role, and apparently citizens have to check up regularly for fertility tests and stuff.
Yeah, that's funny because that would set up a Handmaid's Tale type scenario, right?
True.
Where he's like, "Oh, you're a fertile woman, all right? You're gonna spend the rest of your life just making babies."
Yeah, we can talk about this later, because this was one of the things I thought about the ending of the movie, which is also very ambiguous, and it's not exactly clear what this kind of organization in the end is doing exactly, and that made me think of that, basically like a human breeding program.
So the Quietus is a suicide kit. You can apparently you can order it from the government. The government will just send you this box with everything you need to pass, and this is the same government that says let's promote fertility, but at the same time that says, look, things are so desperate that we're okay with you checking out.
Imagining living in such a world, at one point the population would probably just become too old to maintain production and stuff, and at that point you really have to think about, okay, what are we going to do? There's going to be a lot of people who are too old to care for themselves, and there's not enough people who could care for them, and in such a situation you seriously have to consider making stuff like that legal. So I think it's not too unrealistic, the government just sending out suicide kits or whatever.
Yeah, so in the front of kind of right to die activism, often the argument that people shouldn't be able to check out of life is that for kind of most states it would be counterproductive for the reproduction of that state, right?
Right.
So generally, you want more people, right?
Yeah. And once that dimension is gone, like in this world, it seems like even the government has kind of given up, and they're just trying to do a little bit of crisis management to make the end as smooth as possible, essentially. Smooth for their own citizens, I guess, because we're going to talk about the concentration camps next.
Yes. Well, smooth for some people, I guess.
Yeah.
So the right to die is a I wouldn't say hot topic in the UK right now. The hot topic in the UK, August 2020, is still lockdown and refugees for some reason. I know the reason is to distract from other stuff, but the right to die news came out this week that they imagine that it will be passed into law, some sort of euthanasia law for humans within the next 4 years. By the way.
Yeah, in Germany earlier this year, there was a law that was removed essentially by our highest court, which made it illegal for medical practitioners to aid in assisted suicide, essentially.
Oh, okay.
And now there's a lot of discussion now that this is over and done. Now there's discussion over how you could do it in a way that conforms to the new legal situation, right? And apparently a lot of people more or less immediately started messaging Dignitas in Germany about doctors who could do it or whatever, and they're just trying to figure out, where to go from here. But in terms of right to die and stuff, it's definitely an improvement, and I think we are probably going to see this in the future in other countries as well, as the conditions deteriorate. Let's put it that way.
Yes, I think so too. And also due to the and now in very material terms, not, let's say, more kind of emotional arguments. I mean, the fact that we've got an increasingly industrialized and mechanized and automated production society. People talk about UBI. There's all these people who are not needed for the production side of society. So we should find a way to dignify their existence by instead of just calling them unemployed and giving them and kind of keep giving them tasks as part of unemployment, right? Keeping them busy during unemployment, which is weird, in having to write CVs, having to attend job interviews for jobs that don't exist sometimes. This happens in the UK, by the way.
It's kind of similar here.
It's a mix of punishment, but also kind of keeping people busy, so they feel there's some goals that they have to achieve, right?
Yeah, and I mean, over here it's mostly to make the statistics look better, because if you can get somebody into a temporary job or whatever, where they're working like between 3 to 6 hours maybe a day, and it's below social security. I don't know what the term in English is. Like, you have a threshold of income before you pay into social securities and whatnot. And they basically give people these jobs which are not enough to make a living, essentially. But it looks better for the statistics, because then you can say, oh, these people are unemployed. When in reality they are still kind of unemployed, because these are only temporary jobs. Yeah,
in the UK, it's language is such a funny and beautiful thing, that instead of being unemployed, you are unemployed, but instead of collecting your unemployment check, as I think it's called in the US, for example, so another Anglophone country, here it's called job seekers allowance.
That sounds very nice.
So you're not unemployed, you're a job seeker, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you're doing something, right? You're doing something which is going out and trying to get a job. And an allowance... is what the state says, look, we appreciate you're a seeker of jobs, and we're going to give you this money so you can keep seeking jobs. Isn't that great? Keep being a job seeker. But allowance is also the word that's used for the money that, say, a parent gives to a child or to a teenager who's still their dependents.
Right, it's like getting pocket money from your government, essentially. Yes,
it's like a pat in the head and say, now keep looking for jobs. Yeah, that's a good boy. Go on. Keep looking for jobs. So language is very important. So in this future, the state has sort of given up. They're looking for people who are still fertile, but they mostly given up, and they say, well, if you want to check out, here's a box. We send it by mail, and you can kill yourself.
Yeah, I found that kind of funny, because I think that's not something that's going to happen. sending out suicide kits by mail.
No, I mean, these days it would be. I mean, in a real life, not in the movie, it would be impossible because people would use it to kill each other, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's so much could go wrong.
Yeah.
One interesting difference I think there is between the movie and the book with regards to the quietus thing is that in the book I think the quietus is not like a suicide kit that you get and then you can do it at home, but it's like a public thing where people over the age of 60 basically attend like these public drowning ceremonies, which is quite a bit harsher than getting a nice suicide kit where you just pass away in peace at home. It's more portrayed as this public mass murder essentially, because it is implied that there's coercion and pressure put on old people to do it and stuff. Sort of
like a Logan's Run. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
I haven't, but yeah.
Okay, maybe for the next podcast.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so we've got Theo in the beginning, and it's funny because Theo in the beginning was somebody I could relate to, and then he progressively gets to me less relatable, because in the beginning he says he just says. Even if they discover a cure for infertility, I'm paraphrasing, the world still has gone to shit. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. We can stop the movie now. You figured it out.
More or less. yeah, that's the scene when he is at Jasper's place. Jasper's Michael Caine's character.
Yeah.
And they're getting high because Jasper's a weed dealer now, apparently. And he's trying to tell a joke, I think, and Theo just shuts him down and says, "Oh, fuck you, man! This is all bullshit. It used to be fucked before the infertility crisis, man."
Yeah.
And I mean, he is kind of right, because that's one of the big criticisms I think with the solution the movie offers, is that solving these infertility. The infertility crisis, it doesn't really solve any of these structural and political problems. There are still going to be problems, right?
Yeah.
Because the premise of the movie is that basically the rest of the world has collapsed, right? We don't really know if this is just UK government propaganda, but taking it at face value, it seems like things are really, really rough, right? And it takes some time after such a thing to rebuild and to kind of fish for the solution.
Yeah, they would have to rebuild society completely because of that, say, 20-year gap between no babies and babies.
Yeah,
again,
exactly.
Right?
It's still gonna be a huge problem, and I doubt that the migration crisis, which is like the second biggest problem in the movie, would just be solved magically as well by that, right?
Yeah.
There's still probably people going to trying getting into the UK because it's apparently the only country which still has some sort of functioning government, even when it's a really shitty government. Yeah.
So anyway, the movie is quite prescient, I think, for something released in 2006. It kind of shows a lot of the problems we have now. I guess there were still problems in 2006. It's funny because when I interact with kind of younger people with similar concerns to me online, and they get so excited as in they want to do something about climate change, for example, and the advertising or the kind of messaging around climate change is always about, we only have 2 years to act or 1 year to act. But the thing is, like, since the 80s, the message has always been the same. Like, we only have this amount of time to act. It's always like trying to create like this short-term goal, and and I think this kind of immediate need to have activism that then produces an immediate result. Otherwise, it's invalid. It's the sort of optimism that the people interested in this pregnant woman. Sorry if you haven't watched the movie. We're spoiling everything anyway.
At this point,
there's a young woman that's pregnant, right? And everybody's trying to get her, but to me that's just kind of this immediate need to something that fixes the problem and gives you the feeling that the problem has been fixed, when in fact it's like such a massive structural and I guess even humanity as a species problem. to fix these massive issues, that nothing would change with the baby or with somebody having a baby or not having a baby.
Yeah, and I mean that is probably the main reason why I tried not to read the movie too literally, because as you just said, like this one baby, what is it realistically going to change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one baby out of 8 billion or however many people are still alive in that world.
Yeah.
And one woman who's able to have babies.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's true that these are not issues which are issues or became new issues when the movie came out, like in the early 2000s. Like this is all stuff that goes way back.
Yeah.
Like for decades.
Anybody who's been panicking about climate since the 80s is still panicking about climate.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching like Al Gore speeches in the 90s when growing up, and when you look at environmentalists today, they are basically saying the same stuff Al Gore was pushing in the 90s, right? But nothing is really happening.
Yeah, and they thought it was crazy then, but that's fine because people still think environmentalists are crazy now. So there you go. I mean, when I say think they're crazy, as in let's do nothing.
Yeah, I think that is one of the issues the movie is trying to speak to, I think, because we already talked about this a bit, about, the apathy and just the giving up in the face of this massive issue, which kind of seems unsolvable, and to a certain extent it is unsolvable, right? Like, even if we would stop, polluting the environment right now completely, we'd still have to deal with at least like 20 to 30 years of ongoing climate change, because all of that shit is already up there in the atmosphere doing its thing, right? And there's nothing you can do about that. You can only try to control it a little bit more from here on out, right?
Yeah.
And that's maybe not enough for some people. Like, they want real, concrete, immediate solutions. Yeah. And that's just not realistic.
Within their lifetime, I guess, or within their the kind of their attention span, if you will.
Right. And I think that's what the figure of the child represents in the movie, right? It's a very tangible, immediate solution. Oh my God, we have this pregnant woman. Let's get her to safety, to the scientist group somewhere on Portuguese islands or whatever. And that's gonna fix everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, it's the need for having something to believe in. Right?
Yeah. So we can imagine that 18 years with no children being born, the population is shrinking, right? There's no new babies, people die of old age, there's wars going on. And it's funny that even in the context of this happening, life is very cheap in the movie, in this story. People kill each other for small things. That's what I mean. I mean, there's actual terrorism happening. We see it right in the beginning of the movie, like this shop explodes and people die. There's and for example, nobody knows who did that terrorist act. It goes unclaimed. It just goes, oh, who knows? It might be even the government to distract us from other stuff. So life, when the number of people is shrinking, life has become even cheaper than it is now. Because, for example, the terrorism without any claims or without any demands on the terrorism, right?
Well, there's not really somebody that claims agency for that bombing, but it is implied in the movie that it's either an inside job from the government or whatever, or that it's the fishes.
Yeah.
The pro-immigrant, I don't know if you can call them, I guess it's fair to call them a terrorist group, because they do acknowledge that they did bombings in the past, but then they apparently stopped, right?
In the movie, they say that wasn't them. They just said they used to do them, but not anymore.
Yeah, that they changed the tactics.
Yeah, but for example, for the fishes, who are, I would say, they're kind of, I mean, their main thing seems to be about being more tolerant and kind of integrating the refugees. But they themselves don't seem to value life very much. Like, they kill each other frequently over small things. Oh, you're a bit incompetent about this. Boom, shot in the head.
I mean, that's one of the big,
it's kind of weird,
plot twists in the movie, where Theo he basically gets hired by his ex-wife Julian, who is the leader of the fishes, to get transit papers for this pregnant refugee woman, Key, which he does not know. He at that point he doesn't know she's pregnant, right? And he agrees basically for the money. So nothing has changed in that regard, apparently. And they're on their way to a safe house, and they get ambushed by a gang, and two of the guys attacking them on a motorcycle shoot at the car, and they kill Julian. And later on, it is revealed that Luke, who is Julian's second in command, more or less, like he's presented as her right hand or whatever, that he actually hired that gang to get rid of her and Theo, because he wants to take leadership of the group himself, right? And he's portrayed as I think he is the closest thing the movie has to a villain, but he is still he's not a comic book villain, right? He's not just evil for evil's sake. Like he has there's some motivation behind what he does, right?
Yeah, although I think he's a bit comic book villain. Like he's mostly evil throughout, and then has his little redemption when he dies, which is also a comic book thing, right?
Yeah, I mean he still fits a stereotype of a villain pretty well, but at least he's not doing it just because trying to be evil. Like he has a plan. Like he wants to take Key's child for himself in order to to instrumentalize the child for the purpose of his revolutionary ambitions or whatever against the British government.
Yeah,
and that's the reason why he's trying to kill Theo and stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to read because we never get to hear what they want to do besides help refugees, right? That seems to be their only cause.
That's a criticism I have of the world building and stuff of the movie, because these people's political agenda is very, very unclear. Really, the only thing, as you said, that is outright stated is that they want to fight for equal rights for immigrants. Right?
Yeah.
Which is good enough, but, what else?
Yeah. Speaking of refugees, the refugee camp was so strange. It sounded like you hired some people completely disconnected from the world in, 1980s Hollywood and said, can you, production, create a set for a refugee camp? I mean, it was like it looked like it was the center of it was just this huge market where there's lots of products and stuff being bought and sold, which is it's kind of weird, right? Where do these items come from? What currency are they using, right? Because nobody there has a job, nobody there can get currency. So how do they? So they're trading things, and then there's like this gore stuff, very cartoonish, with their burning corpses at one part. So they put all these people in this fenced-in village, Bexhill-on-Sea, and they said, well, you're there by yourself, so you have to dispose of your own corpses, which is just strange, like a strange thing they would do. But on the other hand, they have like brick buildings to live in with electricity and water. So in fact, they're better than a lot of real-life, present-day refugee camps.
Oh yeah, that's true. Especially when looking at the US and their refugee camps, or whatever they are called officially, at the Mexican border, or even worse when you look at North Africa and Libya and stuff.
Yeah, if you compare...
these camps are much worse.
Yeah, if you compare the current refugee camps in Calais or the ICE detention centers in the US to the refugee camps in the movie Children of Men, a dystopia, something that's supposed to be really, really bad, I would prefer to live in the Children of Men ones. Yeah. I mean there's people with actual buildings.
They tried to make it look, pretty gritty and dirty and overcrowded and stuff, but it reminded me, not so much of the concentration camp, but more like one of the Nazi era ghettos, where they essentially took entire blocks of a city and converted it into a camp, right?
Yeah.
And that would explain why there are brick buildings and proper architecture and stuff.
Yeah, but
like
still...
The Warsaw ghetto would be the closest thing that comes to mind. Which also had an uprising, actually, which was crushed by the Nazi occupational force after that.
Yeah.
Which was pretty brutal. And that is basically what happened in the movie as well, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Like they bombed the whole thing in the end.
To me, the movie... let's say the first 2/3 of the movie are very kind of gritty and realistic, but then when they get to refugee camp, it just becomes very surreal, like a dream, right? Especially the part when they have like ISIS. What? Or
there's like
something that looks like ISIS. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like this organized and armed Islamic terrorist group apparently operating within the camp.
Yes.
And that raises questions. How did they get their weapons in? How did they manage to organize without getting caught and stuff?
Yeah, there's like hundreds of men with Kalashnikovs. I mean, how do you get a Kalashnikov in the British Isles? Only collectors would have them. They're not like a standard issue weapon that you can raid an armory and steal, right? So there's like suddenly all these people with the ISIS jihad kind of headbands marching down the street, shooting guns into the air. It's a refugee camp, yeah, surrounded by the army. Nothing goes in and out. In theory.
Maybe it's supposed to show that the government is really incompetent and doesn't vet like the people going in very well, which I guess would make sense because our protagonists get in, fraudulently, I guess, as well, by essentially bribing one of the cops working there.
Yeah.
So maybe that's. But I think what's more likely is that it's just, the movie came out, shortly after the U.S.-Iraq war. And when, the whole threat of Islamic terrorism globally was, beginning to ramp up, or was at least portrayed that way.
Yeah, all I'm saying
maybe
it
was
silly.
Just for the visual comparison,
It's very silly, that's all I'm trying to say. It's a movie that's kind of very gritty and trying to be realistic, and then that bit just goes, what? In Bexhill-on-Sea?
There's like a lot of stuff in the movie which is very clearly over-aestheticized, I guess. You have, as you mentioned, the shots of the burning corpses, and this happens multiple times in the movie. One time with cows, I think, which is just smoldering on the field somewhere, and then the bodies in the camp, and stuff like there's weird shots with groups of animals. Like there's randomly a herd of sheep running through the camp at one point, and I'm asking myself, okay, this is a closed camp and it's kind of city-like. Where do these sheep live?
Yeah, I mean, there's some element of this in the beginning when he's going down the mall on his way to Battersea, and I think he's in the taxi. And there's all this stuff in the mall. So the mall is kind of the big avenue that leads to Buckingham Palace, right? It's showing like people in the mall. So it has like gardens, at least on one side, and on these gardens lies like a man dressed in a Tuareg, like a stereotypical Arab, I guess, not like a cartoon Arab, right? With the headwear and kind of the robe, and he's leading a camel down the mall, and I'm like, what the hell's happening?
Yes, the camel in the mall, right?
Yeah,
that's really strange.
Yeah, I mean, because if all the strange like non-citizens are being put in camps, what's this? What is this man dressed like a stereotypical Arab driving a camel? And I don't know. There's all these surreal aesthetic elements that then kind of don't really work with the gritty photojournalism aesthetics of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like on the one hand, the movie tries to be very realistic and make it believable, and I think they do a good job, at least in terms of how the plot is set up and stuff. Like there's really nothing in the movie that comes out of nowhere where you think, oh, that's very convenient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it works pretty well. But on the other hand, you have like this over-aestheticization and like this reduction, especially when it comes to ethnic minorities depicted in the movie. Like there's a minor character, I think she's called Marica,
yeah.
She's a Romanian woman, I think.
Yeah.
And she just looks like the stereotypical Romanian gypsy woman, quote unquote.
Yeah. And when at one point they go to this house of this old Russian immigrant, right? And the camera is doing a pan over the set design, and there's like Orthodox idols, and then a picture of Lenin, and then old family photos, and it's just a bit Hollywood, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a more modern day fairy tale essentially.
Yeah, I guess
because when I was trying to make sense of the plot and break it down, like I feel like it's really the old hero's journey formula, more or less, one-on-one, right? You have the unlikely hero Theo, and you have the mentor character in Jasper, Michael Caine's character. And you have the call to action. That's when he gets kidnapped by the fishes and stuff, and it goes on and on.
The
and
refusal,
just,
the refusal of the journey, which is part of the character's journey, because he says,
exactly.
I don't want to do
when he
this.
tries to turn it down initially, and then agrees for the money, and So in that way, it's very much set up like a movie, like Star Wars or whatever. It follows the same kind of basic plot skeleton.
So
I guess.
I guess an interesting aspect of the movie, since I know a few people listening to us will be antinatalists or people who identify roughly with that ethical position, often, let's say proponents of a non-violent human extinction, like say the voluntary human extinction movement, or other philosophers or groups that propose human extinction, usually for the good of the environment or for other reasons. If it's non-violent human extinction, it must come through ceasing reproduction, right? That seems to be kind of the consensus way to achieve human extinction. But this is one of the few movies that proposes a scenario of cessation of births. And although in this case, because it's not voluntary, there's a lot of violence associated with it. Do you think we can glean anything from this? Is there anything like to discuss in that aspect?
I mean, I think the movie is right in that, it's definitely a problematic situation because, as you said, it's not a voluntary extinction. Like, it's just from one day to another, women cease to have the ability to have kids, and that probably causes or would cause a lot of chaos, right? And societal issues. So, especially with regards to like how the government is portrayed, and you have like this anti-immigrant sentiment and this very strong police presence, and borderline fascist government essentially. Because I think they really deliberately tried to make an analogy, or not an analogy, but like a visual metaphor or allusion to Nazi imagery. Like, this is really very, very early on in the movie when Theo, I think he's on his way home from his job, and he gets out at the train station, and for the first time, you see like immigrants hoarded up in cages and stuff.
Yes.
And the camera briefly stops following Theo and zooms in on an elderly woman in a cage, and she's talking in German. And unfortunately, she's probably the actress who played her was probably not German, because it's not entirely intelligible what she's saying. A lot of it is just mambo jumbo, but she's saying stuff like, some of it is understandable. She's saying like, oh, what's going on? I don't understand. Where's my family and stuff? And I think that is definitely something to be afraid of. That is like the political direction the governments would take if something like this would ever to happen.
Yeah, something cataclysmic like this, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, the last thing I want to talk about, but I'll hand over to you later if you want to, there's anything you want to wrap up, was this thing about the Human Project, right? So the Human Project, there's graffiti of it everywhere. Suppose it's based in the Portuguese archipelago in the middle of the Atlantic, the Azores. Nobody knows much about it, except it's essential that we get this pregnant woman there so they can find a cure for infertility. But God, this Human Project sounds super scary.
Yes. It's like this half mythical entity where nobody's really sure if they are real or not, and like Theo in the beginning of the movie and more or less throughout the movie isn't really sure if they do. Like, and that's where the question of faith comes in. Like, he has to believe that they are real and that what he is doing is good, right?
Yeah.
He has to take the leap of faith and trust that the information that he was being presented by his now dead ex-wife was correct.
Yeah.
Right? That this is a group of scientists who are trying to figure this whole thing out about the infertility and find a cure.
Yeah. I mean, it's super scary because we've got this world, right? And that's kind of comparable to present day world, where you have the government, the state as sort of a macro institution, and there's of course lots of other institutions like universities and professional bodies, etc. But this Human Project is an institution that's, I think, that's what it seems like, intentionally obscured, right? They don't publicize themselves. They don't say. So they're not transparent at all. They're like what conspiracy theorists think about the World Health Organization.
Essentially.
Even though the World Health Organization just, they keep publishing stuff, they make their intentions very apparent. But the Human Project is sort of like a conspiracy theorist's view of the World Health Organization or something along those lines. And getting this pregnant, I mean, if they fix fertility, which is kind of the super question, or it just becomes such a powerful thing for a single institution to have, right? Because all of a sudden they would have they would have the rest of the world as their hostage, right?
Yeah, they could make a nice patent on whatever their cure they've come up with is, and hold the rest of the world financially hostage, essentially. Yeah. Because that was the first thing I've asked myself, like who is funding these guys? Is this like remnants of the UN? Is this some kind of like volunteer project, or is this like some rich tech ghoul pharmaceutical company that is setting up this clandestine operation?
Yeah, just
like
to hide.
It's not clear at all in the movie what they are actually doing and who they are.
Yeah, if it was a conspiracy theorist, the answer is obvious, of course. George Soros. He runs he runs the Human Project in the Azores in 2027.
Yeah, this podcast is also financed by George Soros, by the way.
You're not supposed to say that out loud.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah,
we can cut that out later.
Yeah. So anyway, the Human Project, it's I think you're right. I think it's fate, because Theo is respecting Julian's death wish, right? Which was to get her there.
I mean that's
even though he knows nothing, he knows effectively nothing of what will happen, right?
Yeah, and I mean her death is kind of the event which gets him on board and emotionally invested into the whole thing, right? Because they have this cute little scene in the car right before they are ambushed, where they're doing like the table tennis ball thing with their mouse, and it seems like for a moment, oh, maybe they can repair their marriage or whatever, and then she gets fucking shot. Yeah, and after that he kind of feels responsible for Key, the pregnant woman, I guess.
I think he just doesn't have anything left at that point.
Yeah, true. I mean, he loses everything, right? Like, he hates his job, so that's not really something he cares about anyways. But he's after that incident, he's labeled, he's publicly put out for a reward on him. Yes. For killing those two cops in that one scene.
Yeah, that's right.
Which he actually didn't do, but Luke. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then all the people close to him die. First his ex-wife, and then his mentor and friend Jasper.
Yeah.
He also gets killed by Luke.
If I'm not mistaken, in the UK, if you're part of what's considered a gang, if you're with a gang, you get the same sentencing, or you're criminalized in the same way as whatever a member of your gang did.
Also, it's like collective punishment.
Yeah, even with the current legislation, I think he would be responsible for the two murders.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I really don't know what the legal situation here is.
Yeah, if they said, for example, there's been cases like where there's like a group of, there's a lot of stabbings in London, right? So if a group of, say, 12 young people who are perceived to be in a gang, and it doesn't take much, right? And they go and ambush somebody from another gang, right, in the street. If there's a single person from those 12 who stabs the person, all are guilty of murder. Or can be charged for murder equally. So I think the UK law would probably call him a murderer anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's not like the government portrayed in this movie would give
yes,
a shit. Probably.
Yeah.
Because they're doing what they want anyway.
Yeah,
so.
They just want to get everybody off, except the babies. Yeah. Okay.
Except the babies.
I think I've said enough about Children of Men. I'm ready to put it behind my back. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear, I think, from just watching the movie a couple of times that it's about, it's a spiritual movie almost, right? It's about a metaphorical and a literal rebirth of humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the child stands for, and yeah, I guess what you take away from the movie depends on what you think about the morality of having children, and that's something that doesn't get discussed in the movie at all,
No.
right? Whether or not it's right or wrong to subject a new child like to the conditions it's going to be born in.
Yeah,
because
I mean the hero of the movie and the other person in the movie who's also seen as being morally impeccable, which is Julian, right? They both had the child in these conditions of this movie, right? A child that would not have friends their age to play with, and that would probably end up using that virtual reality thing to avoid thinking about the collapse of society.
Yeah, it's not exactly a pretty world to be born into.
Yeah.
But what you have to keep in mind is that it's of course an allegory for our world and the world we live in right now, right? So I would have liked it if they make this maybe a little bit more of an issue in the movie, but that's probably asking too much.
Yes, it's already a very full movie for just 2 hours anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of the stuff we've discussed right now, they're kind of glossed over in the movie, right? All the political and social issues, that's just background noise, essentially.
Just framing, yeah.
Yeah, framing for
okay.
For
so
the rest of the plot.
In the DVD extras for Children of Men, there was like a little documentary they made and they put on the extras. Remember DVDs? Remember these extras?
Oh yeah. These funny little discs.
Yeah, what the hell? I don't know anything about that. I don't remember. And the documentary was called "The Possibility of Hope," which everybody can see on YouTube. Very poor quality transfer, but it's just people talking, so it's fine. There's a lot of thinkers there. Zizek is there, Naomi Klein, Todorov, John Gray, which I wasn't expecting to see there. They're all in this documentary, and funnily enough, the documentary, which is about 30 minutes long, in my opinion, it has nothing to do with the movie because it's not about the allegory. It's about the world in which the movie happens, I guess.
Yeah, it's about the background stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I watched the extras yesterday, and I have to say they have what's his surname? James? Is it James Lovelock?
James Lovelock, yeah.
James Lovelock, yeah, they have him on there as well. And there's this really creepy bit where he's talking about his children and his grandchildren, and how he's an environmentalist, of course, you have to know that, and he's basically talking about all the horrible consequences of climate change and how bad it's going to get, presumably, and how he communicates that to his children and grandchildren. And there's this moment where he smiles very creepily into the camera and says, "Oh, it's very important for these people to reproduce because they are, they're the future, haha." And he says that right after he went into detail about all the horrible shit that's going to go down, presumably, yeah.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down, that quote, because it was so horrible. It's like, to me, that's more horrible than anything in the actual Children of Men. So he says, it's not only awful and terrible about climate change, right? But there's an adventure there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like
nice
the adventure of living in a horrible, awful, and terrible world. They should continue to have their children, he says. What's the point of having children in such a terrible world? He asks. The point is natural selection.
Yeah, he's going full Darwinism.
Yeah, what the hell? And then he kind of does a punchline, which is the people who want to fix the climate and who can survive this horrible and awful world without ordering a quietus kid to kill themselves, are the very people that should be having children. It's like eugenics.
Highly questionable.
Yeah, eugenics, because he's saying effectively that, only people who survive in this awful world deserve to breed, right? What is he talking about? And as if an environmentalist, right, What does the Earth's health have to do with having humans in it? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's very strange because like the bit they use in the extras is where he's essentially comparing global warming to a fever reaction in a human body, right?
Yeah.
So if you use that analogy, then the humans are the virus or the pathogen, basically. Yeah. And he's saying, oh, the pathogen has to multiply. That's what he's saying essentially.
Yes.
To kill the organism. I don't know.
It's a weird.
It's a strange contradiction in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a weird mix of kind of this eco-fascist argument where it puts kind of humans as a virus and you must eliminate the virus, and then at the same time, it's like no, we need to keep making babies, and I think the people who edited this documentary together, I think they didn't realize the monstrosity of what they had published.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't realize the monstrosity of this, right? I mean, this is natalist ideology.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah,
and since that is like the prevalent ideology of most people today, like it doesn't even occur to them that there might be something wrong with bringing people into existence.
Yeah, there was also
like they don't even think about it, and
yeah,
and I didn't really expect Lovelock to take that position as well. Yeah,
it's the same way that you have people in the current, I mean not current because of the pandemic right now, but say 10 months ago you had the climate extinction protests, right? And they were
Extinction
Rebellion, yes, that's right, yeah. And they had, there was like some people in there saying, if you want to fix the climate, maybe stop making humans who are ruining the climate, and these people were treated very badly by the protesters, and kind of shunned and put to the side.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very outrageous thing to say to a lot of people.
Yeah,
because it's obviously like reproduction is such an intimate issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like an attack on your person almost sometimes.
Yeah, to your genes.
At least that's my experience when I'm talking about this sort of stuff to people who maybe haven't heard of it before. Like it's immediately, wait, you're saying that I shouldn't have kids, and it immediately gets personal, and I think that's a big issue when talking about these kind of things.
Yeah,
and people have a difficulty to look at this rationally, and in a sort of detached manner. Right.
There was another comment there in the documentary by Todorov where he said, "We can only survive if we can take care of the weakest. In this case, the babies, right? Because he's talking about babies, and I hate that. I hate that because I'm child free or childless, however you want to call it, by option, and I hate when people say stuff like, "Oh, you only know compassion after you've had a baby," or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's bullshit.
Yeah, it's just.
I think people without children can be very compassionate, and some of them are so compassionate that they, in fact, decide not to have kids.
Yeah, or
because they care about the kids so much that they decide not to have them.
Or they decide to take on care of other people's children, right?
Yeah, I mean, foster care, adoption, that's all stuff I support.
Or becoming a teacher or social worker involved with kind of families and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So anyway, there was some interesting stuff in The Possibility of Hope. I recommend people watch it if they're interested in this kind of topics. In many ways, it's kind of talks about the world of Children of Men, and there's some interesting speakers there. We have our friend John Gray. He doesn't know about us, but he's
maybe
soon. Yeah, John Gray is like the uber pessimist. Yeah, I think he's even more pessimistic than I am in general.
He's pretty pessimistic.
It's very bleak. And there's Zizek as well, avoiding a lot of the questions as he usually does and talking about the stuff he wants to talk about.
Yes. I mean, that's what he does, right?
Yeah, that's what he does. And
that's just Comrade Zizek doing his thing.
Yeah, the Naomi Klein and quite a few other interesting pieces. All right. I've said everything I want to say about this.
Just as a bit of a closing line or bottom line for me, the movie. I think the movie is nice to watch. It's engaging and it brings up a lot of important issues. A commentary of these issues is lacking in some areas, as we've hopefully discussed enough. And ultimately the solution the movie proposes, which is taking this leap of faith, it felt a little bit unsatisfactory to me. Obviously, because it's connected to the premise that bringing children into a world as fucked up as this one, aka our world, is the right thing to do. So that's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah.
I propose.
Good entertainment. Don't watch it for the ideology. Try not to think you're watching a Christian movie, which you might be watching, unless you're Christian. In that case, you might really like it. Okay, thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. Our slightly disconnected ramblings. If you enjoyed what you listened to, you can rate our podcast on the platforms. You can leave us a comment or shoot us a message at social media accounts. Leave below, and yeah.
Or just send us an email as well. We're always looking for topics or things to talk about or people to talk with as well. And we'll be talking about books and movies and fiction, not fiction, or just kind of current events. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.